June 1944. The coast of Normandy is engulfed in smoke and noise. The sun pierces through the gray clouds, reflecting in puddles of seawater soaked with fuel oil. On Juno Beach, beside the wrecked landing barges, the heavy silhouettes of tanks crawl slowly forward. Their armor is caked in mud, chains grind, and tracks sink into the sand. At first glance, they appear to be ordinary Churchill's British infantry support tanks. But on their rear is a strange trailer, like one from a truck, and a thick hose running along the hull. This is the Churchill Crocodile, one of the most unusual inventions of the Second World War. A tank that could breathe fire. At 14:20, Sergeant Arthur Milner gives the command, "Fire!" From the front of the vehicle bursts a column of flame nearly 100 meters long. The air instantly heats up, and the smell of burning oil overpowers the scent of gunpowder. The fire crashes down on a concrete bunker where German machine gunners are entrenched. Within seconds, a white flag flies out of the embrasure. The infantry advances. Thus, the crocodiles entered history, not as a symbol of cruelty, but as a weapon that saved lives. German resistance crumbled wherever these machines appeared. They were feared, but it was often fear that prevented slaughter. Yet the road to this moment was long and nearly hopeless. The story of the Churchill Crocodile begins not on the beach, but in the offices of engineers and in desperate letters from commanders searching for a way to stop the endless losses during assaults on fortifications. By 1942, the Allies knew the upcoming landing in Europe would be the war's greatest challenge. The Atlantic Wall, a system of German fortifications stretching from Norway to the Bay of Biscay, had turned the French coast into an impregnable fortress. Every bunker, every concrete machine gun nest demanded enormous sacrifices to be destroyed. Infantry storming pillboxes died by the dozens. German flamethrowers and machine guns held back advances even where aviation and artillery had already scorched everything around. It was then that the British decided walls should be breached not with shells, but with fear. They recalled an old idea, a flamethrower tank, first conceived during the First World War, but then too primitive and dangerous for the crew. Now, technology allowed it to be done safely. The main problem: how to fit a high-pressure system and a fuel tank into the same hull as the crew. The solution was unexpected. The fuel was placed in an armored trailer, connected to the tank by a flexible hose. It held 400 gallons of a mixture based on napalm and diesel. A high-pressure pump forced it through a pipe to a nozzle, where the stream was ignited by pyrotechnic cartridges. Thus emerged a flamethrower capable of spewing fire up to 110 meters, withstanding direct hits and continuing the fight. Work was carried out in strict secrecy at the Bovington Training Ground in Scotland, where engineers from Vauxhall Motors, together with military personnel from the Royal Engineers, transformed the Churchill from an ordinary tank into a machine of psychological warfare. When the first models entered service, even British officers reacted with caution. Some considered the Crocodile an inhumane weapon. Others thought it overly complex and vulnerable. But calculations showed if it could force the enemy to surrender without bloody assaults, its use was justified. Tests confirmed concrete, wood, sandbags, nothing could withstand a direct hit, and most importantly, the effect was immediate. Even hardened German soldiers fled their shelters in panic when they saw the approaching tank with its trailer of death. On the beaches of Normandy in June 1944, There were only 80 such machines. But it was they who opened the way for hundreds of thousands of soldiers, breaking through defenses precisely, without mass casualties. Their roar could be heard for kilometers. Their appearance meant one thing: resistance was futile. Historians would later say that the Churchill crocodile embodied the British character: heavy, stubborn, clumsy, but fearless and resolute. Its armor not only protected the crew, but symbolized the iron will of the country, named after the Prime Minister, who refused to surrender even in the darkest years of the war. Winter 1942. A windy night on the southern coast of England. Somewhere in the barracks of Kent County, Captain Charles Hobart of the Royal Engineers, known as Mad Hobart, is sketching something strange on a sheet of paper. A tank with a pipe from which a tongue of flame bursts forth. On his desk lies a stack of reports, photographs of destroyed fortifications, and lists of those killed in assaults. Hobart understands perfectly well: if the Allies attempt to drive the Germans out of Europe using conventional means, the cost will be catastrophic. At that time, Allied headquarters is consumed by a single question: how to storm fortified enemy positions. The experience of operations in Dieppe and North Africa has shown the Germans know how to build defenses. Their reinforced concrete bunkers withstand direct artillery hits, and their machine gun nests turn every meter of beach into a slaughterhouse. Infantrymen die before they can even exit the landing craft. The British try everything. Heavy tanks break through walls but become targets for artillery. Sappers attempt to approach pillboxes with mines but do not survive. Even air strikes offer no guarantees. Concrete does not burn. And then a thought emerges in the headquarters, almost insane in its simplicity. If it cannot be destroyed, it can be burned. Thus begins the search for a solution that will forever change the face of war. The first attempts to create a flamethrower tank date back to the First World War. Back then, engineers tried to install a gasoline tank and a pump inside the hull, but the pressure was too low and the armor too thin. If the tank was hit, the crew turned into a torch. The experiment was deemed a failure and forgotten for 20 years. But in 1942, engineers returned to the idea. Now they have everything: powerful pumps, reliable valves, stable fuel. The only challenge is how not to turn the tank into a bomb on tracks. The solution comes from the British company Vauxhall Motors, manufacturer of the famous Churchills. One of their engineers, John Cook, proposes a brilliantly simple idea: move the fuel outside the hull. Thus, a heavily armored trailer is borne bulky but safe connected to the tank by a flexible hose. If the enemy hits it, the flames will not reach the crew. The trailer held 1,800 liters of flammable mixture. Pressure was created by compressed gas, and ignition occurred via pyrotechnic cartridges in the nozzle. In tests, the flame jet reached 110 meters, almost the length of a football field. A small group of volunteers was assembled for trials. Tanks rolled across the training ground, spewing columns of fire, burning through shields and fortifications. One observer, Captain Thomas Craig, recorded in his diary, "When the flames struck the concrete, I felt the heat even from 50 yards away. We realized, this is not a weapon, it is a warning." But deploying the crocodile was not easy. The army split into two camps. Some officers considered the use of flamethrowers inhumane, contrary to the spirit of war. Others, on the contrary, saw in it a way to save hundreds of lives. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, after whom the tank would soon be named, personally intervened in the debate. In one of the War Cabinet protocols from April 1943, his words were preserved. "If the German builds a fortress, I want a dragon capable of burning it from the inside." Thus the tank received a name both symbolic and menacing: Churchill Crocodile. The first models were sent to a training center in Dorset County. There, sappers and tank crews were trained in a new type of combat. Drivers practiced maneuvering with the additional trailer, gunners mastered the new aiming system, and technicians rehearsed pressurized refueling. Tests were conducted under strict secrecy. Mock German pillboxes were built on the ranges, simulating beach assaults. Due to the high temperatures, trials were held only at night. During the day, the heat intensified so much that metal began to deform. Commanders noted one effect that could not be recorded in technical specifications: psychological impact. Even seasoned soldiers participating in the training admitted the roar of the pump and the hiss of the flame evoked a primal terror. The enemy did not need to die to be defeated. It was enough to believe that death was already near. When the Crocodiles were officially adopted in early 1944, their existence was kept secret, even from the Americans. Only a few units knew they would soon receive special tanks. A global operation was being prepared, one that would become a turning point: the landing in Normandy. And it was the Crocodiles that were destined to become its fiery battering ram. June 6, 1944. A grey morning over the English Channel. The air is thick with the smell of diesel, sweat, and fear. The sea boils with thousands of ships, barges, and landing craft. Operation Overlord has begun. But among all these steel waves, a special place is held by machines never before seen in combat: the Churchill Crocodile tanks. In the misty light of dawn, they appear like monsters from another era-long slow-moving, with a heavy trailer tail resembling an iron serpent. Their commanders remain silent, forbidden to reveal the tank's unique features. Even the infantry marching alongside them does not realize they are next to a new weapon that will redefine the assault on fortifications. On a landing barge, senior mechanic Harold Brown checks the fuel valves, tightens bolts, and watches the pressure gauge, 250 pounds per square inch, all in order. His partner, Gunner Robert Doe, quietly says, "Sir, you do realize if they hit the tank..." Brown smirks. "Then we'll just light up the beach a little better." The landing begins. The first waves of infantry are cut down by the crossfire of German machine guns. Artillery thunders from the shore. Mines tear barges apart. Soldiers cling to the sand, sheltering behind debris. But ahead lies concrete, barbed wire, and steel. And then the Crocodiles roll onto the beach. One eyewitness, Sergeant Thomas Gibbs, later recalled, "We thought they were just support tanks, and then a tongue of fire burst from their mouths. A flame longer than a football field struck the pillbox, and everything inside went silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. The flamethrower worked simply and mercilessly. Gas pressure forced out a thick, flammable mixture, almost like oil, viscous and sticky. It ignited from a pyrotechnic cartridge and flew dozens of meters, turning even wet concrete into a blazing furnace. The Germans, accustomed to holding positions for weeks, abandoned them within minutes. Many never saw the flame itself, only heard the hiss and felt the heat. Panic spread faster than the fire. On Sword Beach, the Crocodiles cleared the way for British infantry, destroying more than a dozen fortifications. On Juno Beach, one tank literally burned a passage through a wall, through which an entire company then broke through. But there were losses. The heavy trailers hindered maneuverability, and a shell hit to the hose could turn the tank into a torch. Several crews died before they could escape, and yet their mission was accomplished. Beaches that were expected to hold for weeks fell within hours. Allied commanders were stunned. American officers, seeing the crocodiles in action for the first time, demanded to be given at least a few units. One wrote in a report, "If we had had these beasts in Italy, many of our boys would still be alive." The day after the landing, the British headquarters in Normandy received a brief report. Churchill crocodile proven effective. Crews request more fuel. Soldiers gave these tanks a nickname, Churchill's Iron Dragons. Their roar became the sound of the advance, and their trail of flame a symbol of a new era of combat, where psychological impact was as vital as firepower. German prisoners later admitted, "When we heard the pump noise, we knew the assault was just beginning." The flame became a weapon, not of destruction, but of coercion. It did not break walls, it broke the people inside. After D-Day, the crocodiles advanced with the infantry from the beaches of Normandy to the Rhine. They were used sparingly, fuel was precious, and the effect of the flame was considered a last resort. But when they appeared, battles usually ended quickly. Bunkers surrendered without a shot. One report from the British 79th Armoured Division stated, "No fortified position withstood 2 blasts. Many chose surrender rather than face a third." And yet, behind every victory lay heavy moral questions. Some commanders refused to use the flamethrower, calling it too inhumane. Others argued it saved lives by forcing the enemy to surrender without a fight. Hobart responded simply, "If the dragon saves the night, let the dragon live." After Normandy, the crocodiles became legend. Their appearance on the front instantly changed the atmosphere. Officers smiled with relief, enemies dropped their weapons, and infantrymen felt that behind them stood not just armor, but a force of nature itself. But this weapon had another side, the burden carried by those who pulled the trigger. In every company, there was at least one tank crewman who couldn't sleep at night after battle. They never saw the enemy, only the flame, and that flame haunted them even behind closed eyelids. In the diary of Sergeant Harold Brown, one of the first crocodile operators, there is a brief entry. "Today we burned through another bunker. The infantry says well done, we saved a lot of lads. But I wonder, did we save ourselves?" Commanders tried not to discuss the moral aspect. For the army, only one thing mattered: results. And the results were staggering. In just a few weeks, the crocodiles destroyed dozens of strongpoints, where hundreds of soldiers had previously been lost. The Germans began to fear even the sound of their engines. Intelligence reports noted that enemy infantry often retreated upon hearing the hum of the pumps without waiting for battle. Once, near the approaches to Caen, a crocodile under the command of Lieutenant Philip Morgan faced a fortification held by 20 German soldiers. It had resisted assault for 2 days. Morgan fired a single short burst. Within a minute, all 20 soldiers emerged from the bunker with their hands raised. No casualties, no shots fired. Later, Morgan wrote in a letter to his wife, "For the first time, I realized this tank doesn't just kill. It makes people choose life." But fear of this weapon was felt not only by the enemy. The British themselves treated it with caution. Crocodiles were kept in separate units. Crews constantly checked the equipment, afraid of fuel leaks. In camps, they were parked away from other vehicles, as if people feared they might ignite even in their sleep. Mechanics joked, "Even our cigarettes burn faster." And although the flame of these tanks saved lives, it also left invisible burns, not on the body, but on the soul. After Normandy, the crocodiles took part in battles for Falaise, Belgium, the Netherlands, and even in the breach of the Siegfried Line. They were used to clear fortified villages, bunkers, and caves. In some places, Germans raised white flags at the mere sight of the trailer with its hose, the symbol of fire from which there was no hiding. American units observing the crocodiles in action soon requested their own versions of flamethrower tanks. Thus were born the Sherman Crocodile and the Zippo less powerful, but based on the same principle. However, at the end of the war, the British government faced a difficult question: what to do with this weapon after victory? Debates broke out in headquarters. Some generals proposed keeping the crocodiles in service. New conflicts might lie ahead. Others demanded they be retired, calling them a weapon too terrifying for peace. One of those advocating disarmament was General Hobart himself. He wrote, "We created a monster, but it saved thousands. Now let it sleep." And indeed, after 1945, the crocodiles disappeared from the front lines. Some were scrapped, others sent to museums. One tank still stands in the Imperial War Museum in London. On its armor, traces of soot remain, like a memory that even in iron there is a shadow of fire. Visitors often pass by, not noticing the trailer behind the hull. But those who know the story pause and read the plaque, Churchill Crocodile, a weapon that made flame serve life. And perhaps this is the central paradox of Hobart's invention and his engineers. They created a tank capable of burning through bunkers and walls, but ultimately taught humanity to fear not fire, but the very idea of inhumanity. Their iron dragons brought destruction in order to restore peace. After the war, the Churchill Crocodile tank became more than just a weapon. It became a lesson, a warning that technical genius is capable of creating both wonders and horrors in equal measure. The British War Office collected reports from the front, analyzing the machine's effectiveness. The numbers were indisputable. More than 80% of fortifications that could not be taken by artillery surrendered after the appearance of the crocodiles. But within those same reports appeared words like moral weight. The army had won, but not all of its tank crews returned with their souls intact. The engineers who helped develop the flamethrower system were varied in character. Some were proud, others preferred not to remember. The chief designer, Major Jack Flam, later admitted in an interview, "We didn't think about fear. We thought about pressure in the pipeline." But history placed its own emphasis. The crocodile entered textbooks not as a hellish machine, but as a technological breakthrough, a testament to British engineering's ability to turn any idea into reality, even one that radiated the heat of hell. After the war, the remnants of the Flaming Corps, the units that operated these tanks, were disbanded. Some machines, deemed unsuitable for decommissioning, were transferred to research institutes. By studying the fuel delivery system, engineers at the Ministry of Defense developed new generations of high-pressure firefighting systems and industrial pumps. The irony of fate, a weapon built to burn, ended up helping save lives in peacetime. And Hobart, the visionary general once considered mad, became a legend. He was seen as the man who managed to arm imagination. He did not invent flamethrowers, but he insisted on their integration into armored vehicles, personally oversaw the trials and defended the project against skeptics. In one of his letters to the engineers, he wrote, "We do not build machines for destruction. We build a bridge between the impossible and the necessary." That phrase entered the history of the Royal Engineers. In post-war Britain, attitudes towards the crocodile were mixed. To veterans, it remained a savior. To historians, a dilemma. To engineers, a milestone. When the Cold War began in the 1950s, the British revisited the idea of flamethrower systems, but in a different context. Not as weapons of fear, but as tools of psychological influence and engineering superiority. In one of the Ministry of Defense's secret memos from 1952, it was written, "The experience of the crocodile showed that technology can even tame the element of terror and make it a tool of discipline." Today, the crocodile stands in museums not as a monster of war, but as a symbol of the technical boldness of an era when humanity walked the edge. Its hull is mottled with rust, but if you step closer, you can see traces of soot around the flamethrower port. These dark rings are the fingerprints of history, marks from a time when flame decided fates. And yet, behind all that steel and heat lies a human story. The story of engineers who lost sleep fine-tuning pumps and valves. The story of soldiers whose hands trembled not from cold, but from the realization that they held in their grip a force akin to nature itself. The story of enemies who, for the first time, learned that fear can be louder than bullets. At the end of his life, one mechanic who had worked on crocodile production in Birmingham said in a BBC documentary, "I didn't know I was making a weapon. I was just welding steel. But now, when I see that tank in the museum, I think maybe that was our way of surviving. We simply forged fear so it wouldn't forge us. The flame of the crocodile has long since gone out, but its light remains. It burns in textbooks, in museum halls, in the memory of those who understood. True power lies not in fire, but in the mind that knows how to tame it." When the war ended, the skies over Europe became grey and quiet once more. Tanks that had once roared through street battles now stood in depots like sleeping beasts. Among them were the Churchill crocodiles. Their hulls were covered in soot, and their pierced armor plates bore the scars of war. Mechanics walked around them slowly, with reverence and unease, as if afraid that even extinguished machines still remembered what they had been. To the British, the crocodile became a symbol of resolve. To the Allies, it was proof of engineering brilliance. And to those who found themselves on the other side of the front, it was the embodiment of a nightmare. Many German soldiers later recalled that no other weapon provoked such panic. One captured officer, whose interrogation transcript is preserved in the archives, said, "We weren't afraid of death. We were afraid of those tanks with fire. When they appeared, you didn't think about victory. You just wanted to disappear." The psychological effect was so powerful that in some cases, German garrisons surrendered before the battle even began, simply upon hearing the distinctive roar of the pumps feeding napalm into the flamethrower pipes. But those who operated the crocodile paid a different price. Many veterans admitted they felt a conflict between duty and conscience. They knew that without these machines, thousands of soldiers would not have returned home. But they also knew that their weapon was not just lethal, it broke the human spirit. At a post-war tank crew gathering in 1948, Sergeant George Milner said, "When I look at that tank, I don't see flame. I see faces. Ours, theirs, all the same, only covered in ash." After those words, the hall remained silent for a long time. The British government understood. The crocodile could not simply be written off. It had become part of the legacy of war, not only as a weapon, but as a moral example. Psychologists working with veterans began to study the impact of fire weapons on the soldier's psyche. This led to the first research into the phenomenon of combat fatigue and moral stress, long before it became known as PTSD. The archives of the Ministry of Defense are filled with reports of unusual exhaustion among crews. One doctor wrote, "Those who served in the crocodiles fall asleep with the smell of kerosene and wake up to it. They feel as though the flame lives inside them." Meanwhile, the engineers who had developed the flamethrower system returned to civilian life. Many found work in industry, in heating systems, fuel pumps, and firefighting equipment. Technology born for war gradually transformed into technology for saving lives. The same principles of high-pressure fluid delivery used in the crocodile later formed the basis of Britain's first industrial firefighting systems. The fate of these engineers became a metaphor for the times. Weapons turned into tools of peace, and flame into the light of a lamp illuminating the future. And yet, the question remained, can one be proud of a machine that won through fear? Historians still debate this. Some argue that the crocodile was necessary. It saved Allied lives and hastened the end of the war. Others say it crossed a line, where effectiveness erases humanity. In the 1960s, as Britain marked the 20th anniversary of victory, a restored Churchill crocodile was placed on display in a military museum in Bovington. The plaque read simply, "Instrument of Fire, a symbol of courage and contradiction." Visitors stood silently. Some took photographs. Others ran their fingers over the steel cold, yet seemingly holding the heat of lived time. One boy asked his father, a veteran, "Dad, was this tank a good one?" The father was silent for a long time, then replied, "It was necessary." And perhaps that is the most accurate definition for everything created during war. Not good, not evil, just necessary. Because sometimes survival demands decisions that can neither be justified nor forgotten. After Germany's surrender, it seemed that the Churchill crocodile would vanish along with the echoes of explosions and the smoke of burning cities. But the story of this tank did not end in 1945. In truth, it became a ghost of the Cold War, a reminder that monstrous power, once created, does not disappear. It simply waits for a new time. By the late 1940s, British military officials increasingly asked themselves, could the crocodile be useful in a new world, where the enemy no longer wore the uniform of the Wehrmacht, but stood on the other side of the Iron Curtain? In 1949, several crocodiles were secretly transported to a testing range near Salisbury Plain. Officially, it was for testing flamethrower systems against fortified positions. Unofficially, it was to assess whether such equipment could be used in the event of a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. At the same time, engineers working at Vauxhall Motors received new orders to modify the old tanks for modern conditions. They were now to carry a new generation of napalm mixture, with higher combustion temperatures and greater range. When one of the designers, Peter Wilkinson, saw the results of the first tests, he wrote in his diary, "The flame turned almost white. It didn't just burn, it vaporized." These notes were kept classified for many years. Nevertheless, even the most devoted advocates of firepower understood. The era had changed. The world had entered the nuclear age, and a flamethrower tank seemed almost an anachronism. But the military was in no hurry to abandon the idea. Among the generals, a new concept emerged: psychological weaponry for tactical intimidation. It was proposed that crocodiles be used in special situations, for example, to defend NATO bases or military airfields from enemy infantry. Their mere presence was expected to cause panic. The tanks even participated in joint exercises with the Americans, where the psychological impact of a fire assault on soldiers' morale was studied. A 1952 NATO psychological report stated, "No means evokes such primal fear as the sight of moving fire. Even in the modern era of rockets and atoms, fire remains humanity's oldest terror." Meanwhile, scientists sought to tame the technology. The fuel delivery system developed for the crocodile proved incredibly reliable. British engineers used it as the foundation for new firefighting pumps, industrial nozzles, and even prototypes of low-thrust jet engines. Thus, the legacy of the flame tank gradually flowed from the military into the civilian sector. Many engineers later admitted to feeling conflicted, as though they were washing the flame of its past. One of them, John Livingston, said in a 1968 interview, "We built a mechanism that killed, and now it saves lives. Maybe that's redemption." Meanwhile, the real crocodiles slowly faded into history. By the early 1960s, they were withdrawn from the British Army. Some were decommissioned, others scrapped, but a few were preserved for museums and testing. One was sent to Australia, another to France, and a third remained in Bovington, where it was occasionally brought to life for demonstrations. When veterans came in 1967 to see their tank roar once more and shoot a jet of fire into the sky, many could not hold back tears. It was not a memory of glory, but a farewell to a monster that had once saved them, yet left a permanent mark on their conscience. Interest in the crocodile flared again in the late 1980s, when war historians began studying the role of moral technology's weaponry, designed not only to destroy, but to suppress. At that time, the Churchill crocodile became the subject of university research, documentaries, and even philosophical debates. Professor of military ethics Jonathan Wells said in one of his lectures, "This tank is a mirror of man. In it, we see how far we are willing to go for victory. It is not a symbol of cruelty, but a symbol of choice." Today, the crocodile stands in a museum, motionless, yet alive in memory. On its armor are the polished fingerprints of visitors, worn smooth by time. Each person sees something different in it. Engineers, a brilliant solution; historians, evidence of an era; and veterans, the fire that once burned too close. And perhaps that is why the crocodile remains not just a machine of war, but a metaphor for humanity capable of turning destruction into progress, but never allowed to forget the price at which it comes. History rarely follows straight lines. It twists like a river, and often what was created for destruction becomes the foundation for creation. So it was with the technology of the Churchill crocodile. After the war, the British engineers who had worked on its flamethrower system did not leave science. They simply changed direction, from the front lines to the future. In the early 1950s, strange experiments were conducted at the old testing ground near Bedford. Where once the crocodile's flame had been tested, now stood metal cylinders, pumps, and pipes. From them burst steady tongues of fire, not forward, but upward. This was Project Phoenix, a classified attempt to adapt fuel delivery principles for aviation needs. The system developed for the tank provided a constant high-pressure flow, resistant to overheating and unaffected by vibration or acceleration. For jet engine designers, it was a revelation. One of the engineers, Sir Arthur Mitchell, later admitted in a BBC interview, "When I first saw how the crocodile's nozzle worked, I realized it wasn't just a weapon. It was a perfect model of controlled energy flow. All we had to do was turn that flow toward the sky." That's how the first British test chambers for liquid-fueled rocket engines were born. The pump design inherited from the tank proved so reliable that British engineers used it as a foundation in developing the de Havilland Comet jetliner and the experimental Rolls-Royce Avon engines. One could say that in every jet flame of the 1950s burned a faint reflection of the crocodile. But the tank's legacy didn't vanish on the ground either. In 1955, a group of engineers in London, inspired by the flamethrower system, created a new type of firefighting equipment. It could project foam and water over dozens of meters with remarkable precision and stability. These systems were later used on oil platforms, airfields, and in tunnels. When the engineers filed for a patent, they noted, ironically in the system prototype field, Churchill Flame Projector, 1944. A technology born for war was now saving lives, yet the crocodile left its mark not only in engineering, but in culture. In the 1960s, British filmmakers began producing documentaries about World War II, and every time the crocodile appeared on screen, the audience fell silent. The tank became a symbol of resolve and desperation, a representation of a time when engineers invented under the pressure of fear and hope. One veteran, George Madison, said, "When I look at it now, I don't see a monster. I see effort. People who wanted to survive and save others. Sometimes the price is too high, but that's what it means to be human. We pay it to live." Today, researchers of World War II technology often call the crocodile a transitional linker machine, standing at the boundary between two eras. It was both a beast of the old war and a harbinger of new engineering thought. Without it, many technologies for liquid fuel delivery, pump systems, and pressure stabilization used today, from SpaceX rockets to skyscraper fire suppression systems, might never have emerged. When museum staff at Bovington prepared the crocodile for restoration in 2015, one of the engineers, a young man named Toby Clark, said in an interview, "We're cleaning its armor, but we're not erasing its memory. Every bolt holds a story, and it's not about war. It's about how humanity can learn from the terrifying." Thus, the Churchill crocodile, once born of fire, became a symbol of transformation. From fear came knowledge, from weaponry technology. And now, when a jet engine carries an aircraft above the clouds, somewhere deep in its metallic heart lives the echo of a tank's roaring flame, which once saved lives and later lit the way to the future.